Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring Westerns in Space. The Ring Bonanza by Otto Binder. The Arb by Edward W. Ludwig. Duel in Black by John Foster West. The Fastest Gun Dead by Julian F. Grow. Chicken Farm by Rocklynne. The Ring Bonanza by Otto Binder. Originally published in Startling Stories, July 1947. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The rings of Saturn stretched like a level sheet in all directions, though actually composed of millions of tiny bodies. Homer Timken carefully braked with the nose rockets till he floated motionlessly with respect to a ring's own rotary motion around its primary. Then he eagerly donned his vac suit. Had he struck it rich this time? Through his binoculars, a moment ago, he had seen the glint of one small jagged lump among the ring debris, and it had glinted like gold or silver. There was vast treasure among the rings, if one could find it. In his vac suit, he used his reaction pistol to propel him down toward the glinting mass. In his eagerness, he almost failed to see the other ring body which now hurtled up, pursuing its own independent orbit within the grander sweep of the rings. Timken braked with his reaction pistol only in time to let the marauder lumber past, scraping his foot. He let out his breath with a hiss. That had been close. Many a ring prospector never returned to the Titan docks because of some such accident as this, creeping up on you unawares. More than prospecting in Earth's out-of-the-way spots had ever been, it was a hazardous occupation among Saturn's rings. But it had its enticing rewards and lures. Some prospectors returned with a load of precious metals or uncut virgin diamonds that made them rich for life. Timken reached the glinting body he had previously spied. It was irregular in shape, some 5 feet in its greatest diameter, and it had a yellow tinge in the soft light shed by huge Saturn over his shoulder. Timken permitted himself wild hope as he chipped off a piece with his belt pick. He held the chip up to his glassine visor, squinting at the grain. His face fell slack. "Fool's gold," he muttered, flinging the piece away in a small fury. It was just pyrites, worth a few cents a pound in the market, and not worth the hauling. Timken sat down on the miniature worldlet and cursed all the gods of luck and ill luck. He had been out a month now, and no bonanza. Of course, it had been so for the past 10 years. Each year the old prospector hoped for his big find, and each year he only eked out a precarious living, picking up odd bits from the rings. He looked with bleary eye over the plain of the rings, stretching vastly in all directions. Timken was not young any more. His lean, spare body could not stand the rigours of space much longer. His leathery, seamed face showed the strain of countless near escapes from death. If he didn't strike it rich this trip, he'd have to retire poor. He'd be one of those derelicts, haunting the Titan docks and mooching meals. He shuddered. Hopelessly he watched the endless parade of the rings. By far the most of their expanse was just worthless rock. Then he saw a jet-black lump not far off. It was coal. Timken grinned mirthlessly. Coal had been used as an industrial fuel and chemical storehouse some 200 years ago. Today, it was no more than a curiosity in museums. That was his luck, spotting things in the rings that would barely pay the expenses of his trip. As he sat, he also saw a whitish mass further along, fossil bones, and nearby a dully shining angular object, probably a bit of machinery. Sighing, Timken got up. "Got to make expenses," he muttered. "Might as well collect those odds and ends." His reaction pistol took him to the lump of coal. It was 4 feet in diameter, but in weightless space it was no strain for Timken to push it toward his ship and stow it through the back lock and through the hold. Then he went back for the space-bleached bones. Theory had it that there had once been a moon of Saturn within 2.5 diameters of the giant planet. Gravitational stresses had then exploded the moon into countless fragments which took up the same orbit after spreading out, and thus came to be the unique rings. Seemingly, there had once been life and civilization on the destroyed moon. Fossil bones, once buried within the moon's crust, now floated within the ring debris, and bits of machinery of some vanished and unknown race. There was no oxygen or moisture in space to rust them, and thus the metal remained perfectly preserved through eons of time. Timken looked musingly at the bones as he shoved them to his ship. They made up part of the skeleton of an ancient creature that possibly resembled an earthly tiger. The Saturn Archaeological Museum would pay 5 SS dollars for this, solar system dollars, the standard currency. Not too bad. Finally, Timken got the bit of machinery. It consisted of a broken portion of a huge cogged wheel with dangling wires and bits of other enigmatic mechanical devices. Timken wondered just how advanced the people had been who once inhabited the first moon. That was something even the experts didn't know, with the few poor clues they had collected. For a moment, Timken's imagination wandered. He pictured life on the first moon before the debacle. Towering cities, humming wheels, busy, industrious people. Then, abruptly, their world cracking apart into 1 billion bits. And now only this remained, the rings of Saturn. As Timken brought the broken wheel to his ship, he took one last look around and saw another museum item. It had circled in slow gyrations and come into view from the back of his ship. Timken got that too, perhaps the most intriguing find of the lot, for it was a stone with mysterious writing on it. The museum had quite a collection of such stones, evidently parts of temples or buildings. Seemingly, the people of the first moon had inscribed most of their stone walls with their writings. But these writings had never been translated. They were a riddle that baffled the best archaeological minds of the system. He also put this carved stone in the hold. "Huh," he grunted. "I'm just a scavenger for the museum, that's what I am." Timken looked over the things crammed in his hold, gleaned from the rings for a month. Their total value could possibly pay for the trip, with a few SS dollars to spare. Yet one find of gold or precious stone, and he would dump the whole mess out and be far the richer. Growling to himself, Timken took off his vac suit and went to the controls. He debated. He still had food and fuel enough for 3 days before he had to return to the Titan docks. What should he do? "I'm going to the crepe ring," he finally told himself. "I had no luck in rings A and B, so why not try C, just to play it out to the finish?" Timken had started, a month ago, at the outer ring, Ring A. This portion of the rings had an outer diameter of 171,000 miles, and extended inward towards Saturn for 11,100 miles. Then there was a separation of 2,200 miles between rings A and B, named Cassini's division when first seen through an earthly telescope centuries ago. Ring B was 145,000 miles outer diameter and some 18,000 miles wide. Another space of 1,000 miles, and then came Ring C, or the Crepe Ring, 11,000 miles wide. So had the rings of Saturn distributed themselves under the laws of gravitation when the first moon exploded ages ago. The first moon had not been large, for the total mass of all the rings was estimated at no more than 1/4 of Earth's moon. Timken urged his old rattletrap jetabout up from the plane of the rings till he had a clear path before him, and then jetted straight toward mighty Saturn, which hung in the sky like a bloated, vari-coloured marble. He crossed the narrow, empty space between rings B and C, and finally cruised over the outer edges of the Crepe Ring. Saturn was only 17,000 miles distant, and Timken could feel the faint tug of its powerful gravitation. "Now," Timken said between set teeth, "let's see if I have any luck. I've got 3 days to nose around through the Crepe Ring, searching. I know there's gold or diamonds ahead, if I can just stumble on them." As he slowly cruised above the Crepe Ring, with its binoculars to his eyes, Timken munched a sandwich and now and then took a swig of coffee. In all their explorations of other worlds, Earthmen had never found any beverage better than time-honored coffee, though the Martians tried hard to sell a green-tinted product called tucker. Timken's hand gave a little jerk, and his binoculars wavered. Watching him, one would have thought he had spied something exciting, like gold. But it was something else, almost equally as startling. "Another jetabout!" Timken murmured. "Gave me a start seeing it so suddenly." It was a rare event when two wandering jetabouts happened to cross paths in the vast area of the rings, almost like two explorers in the heart of Africa meeting each other. Timken grinned humorlessly. "Another chump," he thought. "He wouldn't have a bonanza, or he'd be streaking back for Titan. He's cruising and looking for something, like me." Timken flashed his heliograph, reflecting the light of Saturn, at the other ship. An answering greeting flashed back. Timken watched it as it kept going on its course and slowly faded into distance. He felt less lonely for a moment. Timken went back to his scanning of the ring bodies with his glasses. He saw another lump of coal, but was too wearied at the thought of donning his vac-suit for it, and let it go by under him. It was not till a minute later that he snapped to attention, for now he remembered, belatedly, that he had also seen a yellow glow near the black coal. "Daydreaming, that's what I was," he yelled, hastily braking and spinning the jetabout around. "If that was gold and I don't find it again, I'll—" It was not easy to backtrack in the rings and find a certain spot you had passed over. The rings were constantly in motion in their orbit around Saturn, and each body in the rings had its own private motion in respect to the others. Some gyrated fantastically around others. A huge body might in turn exert enough gravitation of its own to hold smaller bodies in its grip, and force them to become its moons. And these satellites then perturbed nearby bodies, causing them to weave and shuttle within the ring. In short, any body in the ring might shift position enough in the space of a minute or two to be lost forever. Timken shot back to the coal lump. Yes, the coal lump was there, not having a complicated private motion. But where was the yellow lump that his blind eyes had seen and ignored? There were 100 other little bodies around the coal lump, and to look them all over one by one. Timken's heart sank to its lowest ebb before suddenly he saw the yellow glint again. Then, thankfully, he shot the jetabout over it and hovered, locking the controls. Minutes later, in his vac suit, he was propelling himself down to the yellow lump via reaction pistol. "It's only fool's gold, of course," he told himself to calm his wildly racing pulse. "Just think of it as fool's gold, so you won't be disappointed again. Or it could be cheap copper, so don't get excited. Yet." Timken reached the yellow body, fumbled with his pick, and finally chipped off a piece. He noticed it sheared off under the hard pick rather than chipped. He dared to hope it was soft gold, and when he held the bit to his visor, "Gold!" He said the one word quietly. Then he sat down on the lump, shaken. "Gold!" he repeated. "I hit it! Gold! My Bonanza! My dream for 10 years!" It was minutes before he could control his shaking nerves and allow the warm glow of exultation to spread through him like wine, giving him new strength. He arose, and like a bird made a circle around the lump, using his reaction pistol. He estimated its weight as 1,000 pounds, earth measure. Then he stopped to stand on it again, a king on an island. "Of course, it ain't pure gold," Timken told himself, "but it looks like about 50% pure. They say the first moon before it exploded didn't have many seas to dissolve and thin out the ore deposits. So I can figure about 500 pounds of gold, at the pegged rate of 37 SS dollars an ounce." Timken's head was too light and buzzy to reach the total. "But I'm rich," he exulted. "Filthy rich! Gold is even more valuable today than it used to be on Earth in the old days." Timken was right. Contrary to all fanciful and unfounded predictions, gold had never lost its value. True, the nations of Earth had all gone off the gold standard in the 20th century, and for a while gold was a forgotten metal, buried in vaults. But then it came into its own as one of the most non-corrodable metals. When space travel came into being, an alloy of gold became the standard coating for all equipment used on other worlds, some of which had noxious atmospheres that could rust iron or copper in days to worthless dust. But gold in its alloy-hardened form defied the worst other worlds had to offer. Thereupon, gold became a metal of commerce, and had its value rose even higher than its one-time value as a money standard. And so, with his find of gold, Homer Timken was as suddenly wealthy as any Spanish explorer of the New World back in Earth's past. "It's sure going to be a pleasure," crowed Timken, "to drag this lump of gold back to Titan." "Yeah, it is, for me." Timken jumped at the sound of the voice behind him, coming out of nowhere. He turned, gaping, to see another man in a vac suit slowly approaching with a reaction pistol. Timken could see the newcomer's jetabout now, parked alongside his own. Timken had been too engrossed in his find to see the approach of the ship. "Huck Lasso," said Timken in recognition, for he knew all the other prospectors back at the Titan docks. "Yeah, Timken," returned Huck Lasso, grinning. "I was the jetabout that passed you a while ago. Just before you went out of my sight, I saw your ship suddenly scoot on a backtrack. That spelled a find to me, so I turned and came back and followed you up." Timken didn't like it. Huck Larser was a younger man and filled out his vac suit with a powerful, hulking body. His stubble of unshaven black beard formed an unkempt fringe to the hard-bitten face that peered out of the visor. There was something in his cold grey eyes that froze Timken. There was such a thing as claim-jumping here in the lawless territory of the rings. "You sure struck it rich," Huck Larser went on. "But maybe you didn't hear me before. I said it was lucky. For me." "You can't take this from me," Timken began, his voice tinny as it came out of the chin transmitter to impinge on the radio vibrators at Larser's ears. "It's mine. I found it." "Sure, you found it," agreed Larser. "But I'm taking it away from you, see?" "No," shrilled Timken. "That's plain robbery. Piracy. I'll tell the police back at Titan." Larser leered. "And what witnesses have you got? You and me are the only two humans around here for 50,000 miles. It'll be your word against mine back at Titan. If I say I found it myself and you're trying to cut in on it, they'll have to believe me, because I'll have the gold." Timken had no weapon. The reaction pistol was not a weapon at all, merely a device for moving in space by means of short, harmless rocket blasts. He struggled against the bigger man. Larser laughed as he gave the slighter man a shove that sent him spinning off the lump and almost into another ring body with jagged edges. Then, still laughing, Huck Larser shoved the mass of gold to his own ship, his reaction pistol streaming red flame behind him. He turned his mocking face. "I ain't ever going to kill you, Timken, like I could. No need going to the trouble. It's still your word against mine back at Titan. You ain't got a ghost of a chance to prove this is your find." Slowly Timken rocketed back to his own ship. He watched Larser stow the gold in his hold and cast out a mess of fossil bones, lumps of coal, bits of machinery, and pieces of carved stone. "Here, Timken," Larser chortled. "You can have this other junk of mine now. It'll help you pay for your trip anyways. See? I ain't such a bad guy at heart." And with a mocking laugh, Larser slipped into his cabin lock. A moment later his ship rocketed away and was lost in black space, leaving a broken old man behind. Timken floated beside his ship for long, bitter minutes without the energy to do anything. 10 years of searching and hope wasted. 10 years of hardship and toil. Fate had at last rewarded him with a magnificent bonanza, and then had kicked him in the teeth. Timken was on the verge of madness. For a moment he thought of opening his reaction pistol wide, gunning straight for the ring bodies, and seeking peace and eternal rest there. But then, shudderingly, he brought himself back to sanity. The will to live triumphed, as it did in all living creatures in the universe. He looked at the stuff which Larser had cast from his ship, which was slowly drifting away, scattering. Rousing himself, Timken began collecting it and stowing it in his hold. No need to let the stuff go, even if it was a mocking gift from the hated thief. He still had to make a profit on the trip. Timken held one carved stone in his hand for a moment, staring at its ancient writings. It was a triangular piece, and seemed to have 2 sets of writing on it. To keep his mind from plunging into black despair, Timken tried to picture again the ancient civilization of the first moon. But a slight, huddled figure sobbed aloud at the controls as the jetabout left the rings and aimed for Titan. At the Titan docks 2 days later, Homer Timken was calm and resigned. There was nothing he could do. No use to put in a complaint against Huck Larser to the police. As Larser had said, It was one man's word against another's. With no witnesses, the legal battle could only end with Lasso the winner. Sighing, Timken hired a rocket truck and piled the museum stuff aboard and drove to the center of Titan City. Here the Saturn Archaeological Museum reared, stately and imposing on its marble pillars. Timken drove to the service entrance and rang the bell. An elderly man answered and flashed a smile of greeting. "Well, Timken again," he said. "Back with another load of relics from the rings? I take it you didn't hit any Bonanza then, eh?" "Well, Timken stopped. No need to go into his story and broadcast his shame and misery to the universe. "No, Professor Blick, no Bonanza, but I've got a load of stuff for you to look over for your museum." Professor Blick, adjusting his thick glasses, came out and looked over each item as Timken took it off the truck. "Our prices are still standard, Timken," he said. $2 SS for a specimen of coal, 3 for fossil bones, 5 for bits of machinery, and 10 for the carved stones." "Why?" asked Timken curiously. "Do you pay more for the stones than anything?" "Because if they could speak, they could tell us far more about the ancient civilization of the first moon than any of the other items. We have a sizable collection now. We can't translate the writing yet, but someday we're going to find the Rosetta Stone that will give us the clue and open up the whole vast story." "Rosetta Stone?" Timken was puzzled. The professor went on conversationally. "Yes. You see, back on Earth many centuries ago, the archaeologists of that time also found carved writings, the ancient records of the Egyptians, and they, too, were a riddle. But one day a stone was found with not only Egyptian hieroglyphics on it, but another language. The text on this stone had been written in Egyptian and then copied in the other language, and that second language, ancient Greek, was known. So this enabled all the Egyptian writing to be translated and—" The professor's voice stopped with a queer gurgle. Timken stared. He had just handed him the triangular stone which had been among Lasso's gifts. "Timken!" screeched the professor. "This is it! This stone has 2 sets of writing on it. One is the unknown script of the first moon, and the other is, oh, thank the stars, it's early Rhian, which is a language we know." It was all rather confusing for Timken after that. The professor bawled at the top of his voice, and more men came rushing out. They all fell to talking as if the greatest event in the history of the universe had taken place. Timken hovered on the outskirts of the group, forgotten for the time being. But then all the men turned to him. They looked at him as if he were some king or some awesome potentate from another star. "And there, gentlemen," said Professor Blick, waving at him, "is the man who brought the stone back." Timken was in an agony of embarrassment as one by one the archaeologists came up and shook his hand silently with reverent respect in their eyes. "Professor," pleaded Timken when this ordeal was over, I want to get away. Just pay me for the stone and let me go. If it's so important to you, maybe you could up the price a little, eh? Maybe, $100? Timken was amazed at his own audacity. The professor looked at him queerly, almost pityingly, and said slowly, $100? Timken, you don't realize the value of this stone. The museum will make you out a check for 100,000 SS dollars. Timken stood stunned, unbelieving. The professor smiled. Yes, that's what I said. 100,000. If we could afford it, we'd pay you 10 times that. Actually, you see, the stone is priceless. The check will be sent to you. You can go now, Timken. Timken drove the rocket truck back, in a dream, and passed a red light. The traffic cop wrote a ticket. "That'll cost you $25, bud," he growled. Timken burst out laughing, and kept laughing all the way back to the garage. He was fined $25. It would have been an economic tragedy before. Now it was a joke. He could pay 100 fines like that and still laugh. The next day, when the check arrived at his room, Timken knew it was not a dream. The amount was $150,000. They had even upped the price voluntarily. Timken went out with the check in his pocket and headed for the spaceman's nook. He had one more piece of unfinished business to do. He knew he would find Huck Lasso there, and saw him at a corner table. Strangely, he seemed depressed, not at all like a man who had just brought in a fortune in gold. "Hello, Huck." Lasso looked up sourly as Timken sat down cheerfully. "Listen, punk, you got nothing on me," he growled. "I know," said Timken, "but why so glum? What did you get for my, pardon me, your gold bonanza when you cashed it in?" Lasso smashed his fist down on the table, spilling his drink. "Don't talk to me about that blasted bonanza," he roared. "You know what it was? It was just plain rock with a film of rich gold ore over it. A fake. A flop. I just got enough out of it to pay expenses, and that's all." "Too bad." Timken grinned, feeling his cup running over. "Oh, don't go gloating," said Lasso. "I still put one over on you. I took the thing away from you, didn't I?" "Sure," agreed Timken. "But you gave me something back which was worth—" At this moment Lasso sat up, as something came over the tavern radio, working through the hum. An announcer was saying, "Biggest news of the day! The Saturn Museum has just announced the find of a carved stone from the rings, which will allow them to translate all the hitherto unknown writings of the first moon. And in honor of the man who brought it back from the rings, they have named it the Timken Stone." Timken was shocked himself. His name would reverberate down through the ages now, attached to a stone as famed as a Rosetta Stone of Earth. But the effect on Huck Lasso was like that of a knife in his heart. He turned slow, stunned eyes to his companion. The Timken Stone?" he mumbled. "What?" Timken drew the check out of his pocket and showed it to Lasso. "Yes, I brought it in. Look, they paid me $150,000 for it. And, Huck, I hope you have a strong heart. Huck, that stone was among the stuff you gave me after stealing my bonanza." "Then I made the find," yelled Lasso. "It's me they should name the stone after. And you've got to turn over that money to me, Timken. It's mine. I found the stone, and—" Timken looked him straight in the eye and said quietly, "Any witnesses, Huck?" The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. The Arb by Edward W. Ludwig. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, February 1955. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The cool Martian wind crept across the rust-red expanse of desert. Occasionally its soft touch stirred the thorny leaves of devil's eggs, the squat black plants which peppered the silent monotony. Here and there a wisp of sand spiraled upward into the bright, thin morning. The wind felt clean and new on Monk O'Hara's coarse, blonde-stubbled face. He chuckled as noisily as a man buried neck-deep in sand can chuckle. "Nothing to worry about," he muttered. "Not a goddamn thing." It was uncomfortable, of course. No man would relish being beaten by hysterical Martian tribesmen, spat on, and buried to roast in the 100-degree Martian noon or freeze in the 50 below zero night. Yet the summer wind from the melting polar ice cap would ensure an endurable temperature through the day. Monk's lungs, enlarged and sensitized after 2 years of prospecting for devil's egg seed, were accustomed to the planet's scant atmosphere. Destruction of his oxygen mask presented no menace. "Idiots," he mumbled. "The fool Martians made off with a sand car like kids with ice cream, and left enough egg seeds to buy 1,000 cars." He was able to turn his head just enough to glimpse the heavy, fat sacks that the tribesmen had dumped out of the sand car. The sacks bulged with a fine black seed that, properly processed, made the deadliest, costliest, and most habit-forming narcotic in the system. The sacks were symbols of a shining future for Monk O'Hara, symbols of fine clothes, beauteous women, choice whiskey, and most important of all, a return to Earth. Of course, it was too bad about the old man. The white-bearded, toothpick slim Martian trader and his black-haired daughter had pitched their tent next to his camp last night. The girl had been amazingly full-bodied for a Martian. Her round, firm body and sensual lips made him suspect that she was a half-breed, a delightful combination of Martian grace and earthly sultriness. Monk smiled as he saw her again in his mind's vision. She slid off her antelope-like lozelle, came to him slowly with her small naked feet swishing through the sand. "It is all right for us to camp by you?" she asked, her eyes wide. "We will not bother you?" "Not at all," Monk answered, his heart pounding. After all, it had been 6 months since he had even seen a woman, any kind of woman. "What is your name?" the girl asked. "Monk, they call me. Monk O'Hara." He could feel the blood pulsing through his temples. "I am Thule," she curtsied. "You like me?" "Yeah," Monk breathed. "I like you a lot." Later, through the ports of his sand car, he watched her lithe movements as she and her father set up their tent. Throughout the night, his sleep was thin and restless, his mind on fire with a vision of the dark, lovely face. So early this morning he'd gone to her again. "How about some coffee, kid? Got plenty in the sand car." She crinkled her nose teasingly. "Yes, I like Earth coffee. My book'll come too?" "No, just you, kid. You're almost busy taking down the tent." She nodded eagerly, smiling. "Yes, I come. I like you." What greater invitation did a man need? But in the sand car the little fool screamed. The old Martian darted into the car, yanked Monk away from Thule, and descended on him like an enraged beast. Monk hadn't meant to kill the old Martian. He meant only to silence his shrill screams and stop the frenzied flailings of his fists. How could he have known that a thin neck would snap like a rotten stick under his first blow? Monk's smile faded. No, he thought, he hadn't acted too wisely. He'd expected the frightened girl to leap out of the sandcar and race away on her gazelle. And she had. But he hadn't expected her to return an hour later with a dozen revenge-hungry tribesmen. His mistake had been in letting her escape. He cursed silently. Then he spat. After all, it was over and done. The Martians had trusted him, buried him, and left him to die. But he'd at least been wise enough not to reveal his ace in the hole. His partner, old Stardust Luke, had left yesterday in the auxiliary sandcar to get fresh supplies from Chandler Field. Old Stardust was as honest as a baby and methodical as a clock. He'd returned today, late in the afternoon, just as he'd done a dozen times. There was no doubt about the punctual arrival of Stardust, and Stardust would save him before the freezing descent of the Martian night. Monk thought for a moment, then chuckled again. His glee more than overshadowed the inconvenience of his neck-deep burial. For the rescue would be the last good deed of Stardust Luke's life. In fact, it would be his last deed, period. The old space rat had outlived his usefulness. If he persisted in wandering over unexplored Martian terrain, he'd probably end up in a freezing or sweltering grave anyway. So it wouldn't be murder. Not exactly. It would only be giving a bit of impetus to what already seemed inevitable. Monk strained his neck muscles to gaze at the sacks of seed. They would all be his soon. Not half, as now, but all. He sucked the cool air deep into his lungs. "Everything's gonna be okay," he murmured. "No, not okay, but perfect." He closed his eyes, at peace with the universe. He could forget the pressure of sand on his chest, forget the heat that was beginning to shower down on his thick, sweat-matted mop of hair. He could imagine himself in a cool, dark bar on Earth, surrounded by smiling women, sipping iced drinks. "Ah," he breathed, opening his eyes. Then he saw the Arb. It squatted on a small, irregular-shaped dune some 3 feet from him in the jagged, sharp-edged shadow of a devil's egg. Its eyes, like shiny pinheads of obsidian, were on a level with his. It was a red-scaled creature, about 3 inches long, combining the most significant characteristics of an earth crab and an earth ant. Its claws were tiny, razor-edged traps on the ends of wire-thin appendages. Even at this distance, Monk saw that his mouth was open. Whether in awe or in anticipation of a meal, he did not know. The Arb rose on its 6 rear legs as if trying to stretch its dark red body into a position of better vision. It rubbed its foreclaws together. Sharpening them, perhaps? Monk shivered. For the first time since his arrival on Mars 12 years ago, Monk felt fear. Till now, he'd met no adversary that his strong, bull-necked body could not subdue. Ordinarily, he'd dispose of an Arb by squishing stomp of his boot, and he'd flour the naked grave with a squirt of tobacco juice. But now it was as if he were bodiless. His broad shoulders, sinewy arms, and barrel chest seemed buried 1,000 miles deep in the very bowels of the planet. He was a helpless freak, a living, sliced-off head on an endless platter of red sand. Fear was an icy bauble in his mind, rising, swelling, forcing out all other thought. "Go away!" he yelled. The Arb's claws fell to the sand. Monk saw the menacing glint of the needle-like tongue in the creature's black, open mouth. Arbs were carnivorous, he knew. They especially relished the soft, tender places of the human body, the lips, eyes, tongue. 10 minutes of attack by 100 Arbs would transform a man into a white, clean skeleton. About the bones, the Arbs would lie prostrate, too stuffed to move, their bodies swollen to thrice their normal size. "Get out of here!" he screamed. The Arb retreated a few inches, backing into the shadow of the devil's egg. "Go on, and keep going!" The Arb turned and began to creep away. It responded readily to Monk's commands. For Arbs were gifted with a rudimentary, if unpredictable, type of telepathy. No interplanetary circus was complete without its complement of the deadly creatures controlled by an expert human telepath. The Arb continued to needle a path through the sand. It passed through the shadow of the devil's egg. It was now some 6 feet from Monk, a tiny red ball half buried in the desert. Suddenly a thought echoed in Monk's mind, ever so faintly, like the barely distinguishable sound of trickling water far away. "I will come back. Many of us will come." Monk paled. Damn, he'd forgotten. The Arbs, according to biological reports, sent out scouts in search of food. The Arb before him was a scout. The fear welled up within him, stronger than ever. His body was held motionless in his tight prison, yet inside him he was trembling. "No, don't go, come back!" He repeated the words over and over in his mind, knowing that the Arb would respond only to the mental impulse, not to the sound of words. Arbs were deaf to the human voice. The Arb paused. "Don't go! Don't!" Slowly, like a revolving wheel, the Arb turned. Its black pinhead eyes seemed to bore into Monk's. "I'm going. You cannot stop me." The thoughts, not words, filtered into Monk's consciousness. "You are not going," Monk telepathed. He gritted his teeth, funneling all his strength into the mental command. The Arb was struggling to break away from the hypnotic chain. Its body was grotesquely twisted, its claws digging into the sand, its head bobbing absurdly. "Let me go. Let me go." "You can't go. I've got you." "Let me go. Let me go." The Arb struggled furiously. "Damn you, I won't let you go." Monk hurled the thought at the creature in a fire of desperate fury. The Arb fell, exhausted. 10, 15 minutes passed. The wind blew. The hot Martian sun transformed the desert into a sea of glittering scarlet. A mist of sand settled on the inert body of the Arb, camouflaging it. How many minutes more till the arrival of Stardust Luke? It must be close to noon. There will be perhaps 5 more hours. 60 minutes in an hour, and 5 hours. The Arb stirred. It began to rise. Monk concentrated on the thought. "You can't move. I've got you. You can't rise." The Arb stopped rising. Monk licked the perspiration from his upper lip in a futile effort to quench his thirst. But there was nothing to worry about. Nothing at all. His head jerked back. The Arb was rising again. It was defying his last command. Monk bit his lip. Of course. His mind was tiring just as muscles tire. He couldn't hope to hold the Arb here all afternoon. The Arb, somehow, must be disposed of. But how? Out of the heat, out of his fear and desperation, came a plan. It was simple and direct. It gave Monk his only chance for survival. He quickly pressed it into the depths of his unconscious mind so that the Arb would not detect it. "Come here," he said. "I won't hurt you." "You will hurt me. You will dispose of me." Monk cursed. Arbs weren't intelligent, but they possessed some reasoning power. "No, I won't hurt you," he telepathed. "Come here. Let me see what you look like." "I am afraid. You have a plan." This time Monk relaxed. He tried to emanate only thoughts of love and friendliness. "I won't hurt you, I promise." The Arb hesitated. "I command you to come here. You will not be hurt." Slowly the Arb crawled forward. 1 inch, 2, 3, 6, a dozen. It was only 5 feet from him now, and in the shadow of the devil's egg again. "That's it. Come on, closer." "I'm afraid of you. Let me go. Let me go get the others." The Arb suddenly braked his advance by digging its foreclaws into the sand. "But you don't want to go back to the others." Monk's lips quivered as he spoke. His words to human ears would have been unintelligible. "You want to stay here. You want to come closer to me." His attempt at telepathic hypnotism brought a small silent reply. "I must call the others. It is my duty to call the others. The others are hungry." A shudder passed through Monk's hot, tight body. A few minutes ago he had delighted in the coolness of the desert. Now the heat seemed to be pressing down upon him like the fiery hand of Satan. "You're a scout, aren't you?" he asked. "You find food for the others. You go back and tell the others what you found?" "I tell the others. The others are hungry." "But you're hungry too. Why share what you've found? Why not take it all for yourself?" No reply appeared in Monk's mind. He continued. "Come closer. Look at me. You're hungry. You're too hungry to waste time calling the others." The arb came closer. It passed out of the shadow of the devil's egg. It came to within 2 feet of Monk. It crossed the small dune. Slowly, slowly, its legs laboured through the thin sand. At last it stopped some 6 inches from Monk's face. It appeared immense, like a lumbering, scaly giant from the planet's billion-year ago past. It rubbed its claws together, threateningly. Its black mouth opened, closed, opened, closed. Its needle tongue twisted like a silver snake. "I am hungry," came the thought, "so very hungry, but I should call the others." Combined fear and hope hung over Monk like an omnipresent shower of fire and ice. Sweat dripped into his hot eyes, obscuring his vision. He opened his mouth. "Look," he said, "you are hungry." He wriggled his tongue as a fisherman would cast out bait. "Hungry, hungry, hungry," came the tiny voice. An eternity passed. Monk's heart was a monstrous hammer pounding in the depth of his body and in the depths of the planet. The arb was motionless, save for the restless, uncertain moving and blinking of its eyes. Then its forelegs lifted. It drew itself forward. 1 inch, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Monk beckoned the creature on with his wriggling, twisting tongue. "That's it," he telepathed. "Closer, closer." The arb entered Monk's open mouth. Crunch! Monk chewed and spat and chewed and spat. He grimaced hideously. He coughed and choked. The arb tasted like a combination of paprika and oil. He thought he was going to retch, but did not. And it was over. Monk breathed the cool air. His weary mind thought of the stupid white-bearded Martian and of his lovely daughter. He thought of what it was going to do to that idiot space rack, Stardust Luke. His gaze travelled to the empty red desert where in about 4 hours Stardust Sandcar would appear. It shifted to the sacks of priceless devil's egg seed and began to chuckle. And last, his gaze turned to the black pinpoint eyes and the moving foreclaws of the 2 arbs which squatted some 3 feet away from him in the jagged, sharp-edged shadow of a devil's egg.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
Duel in Black by John Foster West. Originally published in Planet Stories, Winter, 1947. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Young Ron Cragg fused the edge of his claim tag to the metal vein in the quartzite rock with its heat gun. Then with heavy shod fingers he tugged at the small copper disc, but it remained firmly in place. "That makes you owner, according to law, Mr. Cragg," he murmured. "In the lonely, rugged reaches of Luna's North Country, a man had to talk to someone. A real lode, looks like. Richest uranium lode I've seen in many a lunar June. Bring me a nice roll if some of those rotten claim jumpers don't." Automatically he grasped the hilt of his gun, loosening it in the holster. He sauntered toward the catatred, parked near the southern rim of the small crater near the mouth of the gorge. He could see several purple nebulous space moths fluttering around the engine of his vehicle. Cragg watched them as he approached the machine. They dipped, fluttered, and weaved about the catatred, many of them wrapping themselves about the warm metal of the engine and eagerly absorbing any heat present. They reminded Ron Cragg more of a translucent amoeba wreathing through the nothingness of space than moths. But some ancients had dubbed them moths, and moths they had remained. They ranged in size from the area of a man's hand to about 3 square feet. He knew 2 things about them.
They could detect the slightest rise in temperature over a distance of 50 yards, and they did not like the intense, constant heat of the 2 weeks' lunar days. They apparently disappeared into craters and fissures during the hotter parts of the day and came out after the setting of the sun. "Good thing my suit and thermocubes are completely insulated," he muttered, "or there'd probably be about 10,000 of them wrapped around me, drinking up the heat." He dropped his hands to the 2 metal blocks built onto the suit high on each hip. Those 2 mechanisms were almost as important as his oxygen tank. They generated the heat conducted to the material of the suit and protected him from the 153 degrees centigrade of the lunar nights. Of course, he could last a while with only one of the units functioning. A man got into the habit of checking them during the long nights. His life depended on them and the oxygen tank, and sometimes the gun. The pale turquoise disk of Earth rode low in the heavens above the serrated Alps, towering above him, illuminating the rugged fastness in a sort of aqua glow. Earth, now at full, lighted Luna many times brighter than a full moon ever had lighted her. But the countless thousands of shadows cast by lava stalagmites, spires, boulders, and mountain peaks were pits of nothingness. Crag walked into the Stygian blackness cast by stalagmite and disappeared as completely as though swallowed up by a dark hole in the moon's surface. He passed on through the shadow and reappeared abruptly on the other side. He himself cast a long black shadow, more weird because it appeared to be a black pit sliding over the floor of the crater. Instinctively, Ron Crag crouched as the pencil of flame streaked past his head. He could not feel the heat through the insulated suit, but he knew it had missed him by scant inches. He wheeled and darted back into the shadow he had just quitted, his gun leaping into his hand. He saw a burly form dart into the shadow of a massive boulder across the basin from him. He started to snap a beam at it, but held his fire. The flare would only betray his own position. He could not see the slightest shape, the slightest trace of movement in the inky blackness of the other shadow. There was some compensation in knowing that the ambusher could not see him either. Without air to diffuse the earthlight, the shadows were sharp and distinct, as though no light existed at all in the universe outside their borders. He glanced in the direction from which his attacker had come. There, in the north edge of the crater, in the mouth of the canyon, another catatread was parked. It was an old model, battered and eroded by time and hard usage. Ron Crag thought he recognized the steed. He had seen it once or twice down south, in the parking area back of the Tycho Terradome. Realizing the identity of his assailant, a sudden terror paralyzed him for a moment, but then it fled, leaving him trembling and angry. "Howdy, son," a sarcastic voice drawled into the earphones of his radarphone. "You shouldn't talk to yourself about your rich loads, else you should be sure your radarphone is cut off, so's poor luckless critters like me couldn't overhear ya." Crag bit his lip in anger and shame. The killer had heard his remark, got a directional fix on his position, and... "Joe Braun?" Crag grated into the transmitter in his helmet, forcing the quaver out of his voice. "Biggest, dirtiest claim jumper in all North Luna." "Nobody ever proved a thing on me," Joe Braun guffawed. "No, or you'd be at the bottom of some crater," Crag retorted. "This time you've slipped." "Think so, fella? Think he'll be reporting this?" Ron's flesh crept. There were few men on Luna who would match flame with this black-bearded killer. Those luckless ones who had challenged him were now piled at the bottom of various craters. Crag stared at the black shadow protecting his adversary, gripping his gun. But he knew there would be nothing to shoot at unless Braun shot first, revealing his position. And Joe was no fool even when he faced a greenhorn from Earth. Crag was at bay here in the concealing shadow, helpless, trapped, and calling for help was out of the question. The radarphone would not carry to the nearest terradome. The catatread, If he could make a dash for the cathetred, reach it and throw a light beam into the shadows, he could burn the other to a crisp with a large swivel gun. But then a wave of despondency blacked out his thoughts. It was too far to the vehicle. Even with the lighter gravity of Luna to hold him back, his spacesuit was heavy and cumbersome, and he could never make it before Joe Braun would throw at least 3 shots in him. He would be a clay pigeon. Suddenly he realized the hopelessness of his predicament. He could never match flame with Joe Braun. Ron Cragg knew he did not have a chance in an open duel with a ruthless killer. "What's the matter, son? Afraid?" came the taunt through his headset. "I guess you know what the penalty is for claim jumping," Cragg snapped, "to say nothing of attempted murder." "Sure I do," Joe Braun laughed. "A great big pussy'll hunt me down and toss me into a bottomless crater. That's what happens to claim jumpers as gets caught. And you'll get a big fat reward, huh, sonny?" Ron bit back his answer. "But you named one of the charges wrong, son," chided Joe gently. "You called it attempted murder." He chuckled. "That's one thing old Joe Braun ain't ever going to be guilty of. Why don't you come out of that shadow and get it over with?" Cragg did not answer. He looked toward the cathetred. There was not a single rock or spire between it and him to protect him. The cliffs of the Alps rose sheer and precipitous from the level of the crater floor, and for most of the distance to the vehicle, the very base of the cliffs was brightly illuminated in the earthlight. But here and there a black shadow did jut out from the base of the precipice, cast by jagged peaks 8,000 feet above the tiny basin. Those shadows formed an irregular chain of black splotches over the pumice-covered floor between Cragg and the cathetred. Cragg wasted no time weighing his chances. Blood beat fiercely in his temples as he tensed. He darted out into the earthlight, then retreated back into the same shadow as a livid ribbon of flame streaked by just in front of his visor port. He knew it was excellent shooting for a handgun at that range. It would take Joe Braun 10 seconds to recharge and readjust the gun, and at that time Ron Cragg darted out into the earthlight again and fled for the nearest shadow 100 feet away. He ducked into the blackness only split seconds ahead of another bolt of flame. If Braun only nicked his suit, his oxygen tank, or his thermocubes, it would finish him, and the gunman was getting his range. Joe Braun was out in the light now, dashing for the shadow of a spire nearer Cragg's cathetred. Ron Cragg raised his gun and pressed the trip. A bolt of flame cleaved space just behind the hurtling shape. A disappointed oath ricocheted about the close walls of Cragg's helmet. He quickly pressed the charge poles of the gun against the battery post in his accessory belt and recharged the gun. He then turned the range dial to 75 yards, leaving the bolt diameter at 1 inch. He crouched in the shadow, peering across the intervening area between himself and his assailant. "Missed, son," Joe Braun guffawed. "Want to make it to your cathetred, eh? Well, 2 can play the same game." Cragg swallowed an angry retort. Despair was again rising in him like a dense fog. Joe Braun darted for another shadow, drawing ever closer to Cragg's vehicle. Cragg took careful aim, but his hand wavered ever so slightly. He fired. A streak of flame reached out and nicked. No, it passed just to the rear of the fleeing man, a little above hip level. He could have sworn the bolt grazed the man's accessory belt, but no apparent damage was done. The huge man kept running and ducked into another shadow nearer the cathetred. If Joe Braun made it safely to the machine, he could turn the young prospector's gun on its owner and burn him down without effort. The next shadow in the chain was only 20 yards away. Cragg covered the distance in 3 strides. Another bolt blasted space between his head and right shoulder. He snapped a bolt back in retaliation. It cut high and to the left. Cragg glanced frantically at the cathetred. It was still too far away to reach in one dash. He knew he could never make it unless he hugged the shadows as he had been doing. Several space moths still clung hungrily to the cooling engine of the machine, but many of them were flopping and writhing frantically in space above the machine. They had detected the violent heat from the flame guns in the instant before their heat was dissipated into space, but that split second was not long enough for the creatures to locate the origin of the heat. They seemed frustrated, flopping desperately about in confused circles. Some of them fluttered into the shadows of the rocks and spires in their search, and their vaguely radiant network of veins squirmed like purple wraiths in the Stygian blackness. Crag's attention was suddenly yanked back to his predicament when Joe Braun darted for another shadow. Crag snapped another bolt and missed again. Either the bandit had plenty of guts, or he knew Ron Crag was really a poor shot. He did not hesitate in his advance from shadow to shadow toward the cathetred. It was a duel to the death here in the shadows. Ron Crag dashed to the next shadow without drawing flame. Apparently Joe deliberately held his fire, for the lighted area between this one and the next shadow was much further than Crag could sprint even in 10 seconds, and beyond the next one lay the cathetred. He crouched against the rock cliffs, glancing first toward the vehicle, then back at the black blot that he knew concealed the killer. There were only 3 more spires between Joe Braun and the cathetred, 3 more shadows, 3 more short sprints. Once the claim jumper made the machine, Ron Crag knew the duel was over anyway. Maybe his best chance was to wait here, aim carefully and take a chance on a lucky hit. But if he missed Braun in the first sprint, the man could make it all the way to the spire nearest the machine before Crag could recharge. And if he reached that last spire... Perhaps he'd better run for it after all, Crag thought desperately. But he knew with a cold certainty that the sure aim of the gunman could not miss him in the long sprint. Perhaps if he shot in Joe's direction just after he broke into the earthlight, it might divert the killer's aim enough for a miss. He decided abruptly that it was his only chance. With trembling fingers, he checked the range dials on the gun. His tongue clung to the roof of a dry mouth. Crag crouched, darted forward, then halted so abruptly on the very rim of the shadow that he fell backwards and landed gently on both elbows. Slowly he got to his feet. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Several space moths were weaving through space toward the shadow of the pinnacle concealing the bandit. Crag stared, breathing more evenly now. More and more of the nebulous creatures were rising above the cathetred and moving straight as a plumb line in the wake of the leading moths. He stared at the inky shadows where he knew the killer lurked. The first 2 or 3 moths had already reached their destination. He could see their pulsating, irradiant veins curled around some object that had attracted them. More and more of the creatures floated into the shadow, disappeared for a moment, and then reappeared for a moment, and then reappeared as vague glow, fluttering toward the mass their companions had already formed. Ron Crag watched. The killer was apparently oblivious to their presence. Ron wet dry lips with his tongue, while his fingers slowly reset the dials on the gun. Range 60 yards. Diameter of beam 4 inches. Slowly he raised the gun and took careful aim. 8 inches to the right, 18 inches above the radiant cluster of space moths. If he was wrong, it was a gamble, and if he was shooting at the wrong space, Joe Braun would get him with a flare of Ron's gun. Even if he only wounded him, the other would get him. "Worried, fella?" the harsh voice began. A coruscating tube of flame leaped at the shadow across the canyon. For a moment it illuminated the area around the bandit in a brilliant glare. His taunting voice broke off with an agonized gasp. In the brief flash, Ron Crag saw the man twist erect, his empty hands grasping heavenward. He took 3 halting steps and tumbled into full view in the earthlight. A great charred hole was burned completely through his chest, and already the space moths were shifting to the wound, eagerly absorbing the escaping heat from the suit and from Joe Braun's body. Ron Crag slowly approached the crumpled form, gun ready. One glance at the sightless eyes, The bearded face and open mouth behind the visor port was all he needed to confirm what he already knew. Joe Braun had jumped his last uranium claim. Joe Braun had pulled his last gun. He leaned over the body, examining it closely. His gamble had panned out. One corner of the thermocube on Braun's right hip was fused, and a pinpoint hole was evident. The heat bolt Cragg thought struck the killer's accessory belt had not missed after all. "I'll be a fork-tailed comet," Ron Cragg breathed. He glanced affectionately at the squirming purple creatures. "Thanks, friends," he murmured. Then he set out on shaking legs for the catedral.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story. The Fastest Gun Dead by Julian F. Grow. Originally published in If, Worlds of Science Fiction, March 1961. Narrated by Tom Trussel. He was a big man, broad of shoulder, slim of hip. His Stetson was crimped Texas style, over slate-grey eyes that impassively had seen much good and more evil in their 26 years. He stood in the saloon door with the dust of the streets of Dos Cervezas Pequeñas still swirling about scuffed range riders' chaps. His left hand held open the weather-beaten swinging door. The right hovered over the worn peachwood butt of the Colt holstered on his right thigh. The slate-grey eyes, emotionless, swept the crowd bellied up to the bar, and stopped at one man. When he spoke it was flat, but with a ring of tempered steel, and every man but that one drew back out of range. "I want you, Dirty Jake," the big man said. "Now." Dirty Jake shot him into doll rags, naturally. Dirty Jake Needlemeyer was, you might say, the most feared ribbon clerk in the territory. Easily the most. I remember him from the early days, from the first day he came to town, in fact. I remember because he got off the stage just as I was leaning out the window nailing up my brand-new shingle, and my office was, and still is, upstairs next to the stage depot. I was down on the boardwalk admiring it, all shiny gold leaf on black, like the correspondence school promised. Hiram Pertwee, M.D. His voice broke in on me, all squeaky. "Beg your pardon," he said. "Where's the YMCA?" Well, that isn't the usual sort of question for here. I turned around. There he was. A scrawny little runt, about knee-high to short, wearing a Panama hat, a wrinkled linen duster, and Congress gaiters. He wasn't especially dirty then, of course, only about average for a stage passenger. He kind of begrudged his face, with little squint eyes and a long thin nose, a moustache like a hank of Spanish moss, and just about chin enough to bother shaving. Under his duster he wore a claw-hammer coat, the only alpaca one I ever saw, and I never from that day out saw him wear any other. He stood there looking like he'd never been any place he really cottoned to, but this might just be the worst. I was just a young squirt then, and not above funning a dude. I told him the YMCA was around the corner, 2 doors down, and up the back stairs at the Owl Hoot Palace. He nodded and went the way I told him. That was, and still is, Kate's 4-bit crib. The girls there wear candy-striped stockings and skirts halfway to the knee, and their shirt-waists are open at the neck. Dirty Jake didn't speak to me for 3 years. He wasn't Dirty Jake then, though, just Jacob Needlemeyer. fresh from selling ribbons and yard goods in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and hot to find a fortune in the hills. He'd been a failure all his natural life. This was a new beginning for a man 34 who was already at the bitter end and looking for the path back. Gold was the way, he figured. He was going to get it. But he didn't. He was back flat broke and starving in 4 months. He spent the next 17 years behind the notions counter at Martin's Mercantile, selling ribbon and yard goods and growing old 2 years at a time. I think it tainted his mind. Leastways, from the time I got to know him, some 14 years gone, he's been what you might say a queer actor. At first, when the store closed at sundown, he'd take off for the near hills with a pick and a sack, still seeking for colour somebody might have missed. After a while, he didn't bother with the gear. He just moseyed around all that rock mostly, I suppose, to be away from people. Truth to tell, people were beginning to avoid him anyway. He was getting kind of gamey over the years, and cantankerous generally. Maybe it's kind of funny we got more or less friendly, but doctors and ribbon clerks aren't so all fired far apart. They both have to do with people and their ways, and like to get shut of both now and then. Every couple of months I'd go along with him up in the hills to get the sick smell out of my nose. Night air and a night sky can be pretty fine if you've been looking at tongues and such long enough. Going out like that, we didn't say much. I preferred it that way, since Jake Needlemeyer was a boob. A smart man can get on tolerably well with an idiot if both just have sense enough to keep their mouths shut. One time he didn't was when he brought along a bottle of rye. He got started and was going on to beat the band, yapping about how life was a cheat and someday everybody'd respect Jacob Needlemeyer, until finally I lost patience and told him that while I treasured our association beyond pearls, I'd chuck him off a cliff if he didn't shut the hell up. I was nice about it, and after that it was like I said, tolerable. Well, sir, about 2 years ago he came into my office while I was darning up some fool borax miner that got himself kicked square in the bottle on his hip. Jake stood in the corner picking his teeth while I finished. After the borax miner limped out, he spoke up. "Come in?" That was all the invitation he ever gave. "I guess," I said. I sloshed the suture needle in a basin, gave it a couple of swipes on the honestone, and threw it in my satchel. That miner had a tough rind. Jake went out first. I closed the door behind us, not locking it, of course, because our night marshal was kind of my relief surgeon whenever I was on calls. He was a Seckish hospital orderly during the rebellion. He was better with a saw than with sewing, but he could tie up most wounds well enough to do till I got back. Jake and I set out south up the mountain trail, but pretty soon it hit me he was heading someplace considerable more directly than we usually did. Sure enough, he took off at an angle from the trail after a bit. We struck up into some fairly woolly country. He wasn't following any sign I could see, at least not by moonlight, but he kept going faster until I was plumb out of wind. We were in the hills overlooking Crater Lake when we came to kind of an amphitheatre in the rocks, some 20 feet across. He stopped at the edge of it and stood staring in, silent and breathing catchy. Me, I just chased my own breath for a while, then looked too, and saw what he was aiming at. Right in the middle, shining pale in the moonshine like nothing else does, was a pile of old bones. Jake, I saw, had seen it before. It was scaring him yet. "Old bones, sir, are still bones. I've seen and set my fill. But after I got a good look at these, they scared me too." There were 4 skeletons altogether, all nicely preserved, and only 3 of them were men. Injuns, I mean. You could tell that from the shreds of buckskin. 2 of them still had weapons near their right hands, one a stone knife, the other a lance, and the top of each of the 3 skulls had been shot clean away. At least, half of the top had, and the same half on all 3. Almost the entire os frontale and ossa parietalia on the left side had gone on each one. I hunkered down to see closer, while Jake stood back and shook. I struck a sulphur match and saw something else about those 3 redskin skulls. The edges where the bone was gone weren't fractured clean like a bullet or a club would do. They were charred. The 3 were sprawled around the 4th skeleton, and that was the one gave me the vapours. It was more or less man-shaped, but it wasn't a man, that I know. I don't believe I care to find out what it was. Instead of ribs, there was a cylinder of thin bone, and it had only 1 bone in the lower leg. What there was for a pelvis, I've never seen the like, and the skull was straight out of a Doré Bible. There was a hatchet buried in that skull. The bones of the right arm were good and hefty, and it had 2 elbows. The left arm was about half the size, not crippled, but smaller scale, like it was good for delicate work and not much else. About 10 inches from the widespread 6 fingers of its right hand was what you knew right off was a weapon, even if it did look like an umbrella handle. I was just reaching down to touch it when that fool Jake made his move. He'd been standing behind me, closer I bet than he'd ever got before, staring down at that 4th skeleton and making odd noises. I tell you, it was something for a medical man to see. Suddenly he grunted like he was going to be sick. He snatched up the femur from one of the Indians and swung it up to smash that 4th skeleton to smithereens. Well, sir, quicker than the eye could see, the umbrella handle smacked itself into the palm of that bony hand, sending fingers flying in 6 directions. It hung there in the air against what was left, trained dead on Jake's head, and it hummed. The femur dropped from Jake's right hand like he'd been shot. He hadn't, though, because he was still wearing his skull, and by that time running. Soon as he did, the umbrella handle flopped over and just lay there, the hum dying away. When it stopped, the place was pretty quiet, because Jake was off in the rocks and I was going over some things I wanted to say to him immediately I was able to talk again. That 4th skeleton had the fastest draw I'd ever seen. Jake stuck his head up from behind a boulder. "Doc," he said, "why didn't he shoot?" The question wasn't as all-fired pip-witted as Jake was capable of. It took me upwards of 3 weeks to work out why a weapon that could draw and aim itself didn't shoot too. I'd heard a little clink when the weapon flew into the skeleton's hand. It came from a metal disc that lay in its palm, toward the heel of the hand. The disc was thin, and only about as big as a 2-cent piece. The mate to it was set in the butt of the umbrella handle, convex where the other was concave. Going at it kind of gingerly, I slid the disc in my vest behind my watch and put the umbrella handle in my right coat pocket. It was a key-wind repeater with a gold hunting case, that watch, and I worried about it every step down the mountain. I walked a good 400 yards behind Jake all the way back into town, just to be on the safe side. We didn't linger either. We wanted lights. By the time I got the 2 objects locked in my roll-top, my heartbeat in anybody else would have had me telling the sexton to start his hole. I prescribed bed for me, told Jake, who hadn't hardly even drawn breath the whole time, to go to hell, and retired. Next day a squabble came up over some borax rights up country. I didn't get to open that roll-top for a time. Then one early morning, coming back in the buggy from a house call in Pockmark, 40-odd miles north, I got to worrying again at the umbrella handle and those dead Indians. Seems like 4 or 5 times a week some chunkhead hunkers down hard with his spurs on. When I got to the office that night, there was one waiting, a bad one, Spanish rowels, and Jake was sprawled in my chair, picking his teeth with my spare scalpel. I patched up the chunkhead, took the scalpel from Jake and rinsed it off, and watched him suck his teeth for a while. It began to look like it was going to be stubborn. So finally I said, "Say, Jake." He grunted. "Jake," I said, "I think I've got that dingus figured." He snuck a glance over at the desk, so I knew he knew what I meant, but he was busy pretending that wasn't what he came to talk about. "I think it's a gun that can read minds like a gypsy," I said. Jake still looked bored, so I took the umbrella handle out of the roll top and waved it at him. He dove off the chair and started rolling for the door. "You damn fool," I said. "It won't go off." I was reasonably certain it wouldn't, but I laid it back down by the disc gently anyhow and sat in the chair. I've only got the one chair, on the theory that anybody who isn't bad enough to lie on the table is well enough to stand. Jake edged over and stood like a short-legged bird on a barbed-wire fence. "It can what?" he said. "It can read minds," I said. "You were going to bash those bones. The gun knew it, and trained square on your head. You remember?" He remembered. "And those Injuns," I went on. "You remember them? The left side of the head on each of them was blown off." I hauled down a roller chart of the human skeleton. First time I'd done that since I don't know when. "This up here is the brain," I said. "We don't know a hell of a lot about it, but we do know it's like a whole room full of telegraphers sending messages to different parts of the body along the nerves. They're like the wires. This left hemisphere, right here, sends to the right side of the body. Don't fret about why. The nerves twist going into the spinal cord. Okay, we know too that the part of the brain that sends to the arm is right here in the parietal lobe, right under the chunk of skull that was shot off on those 3 Injuns." "Sure," Jake said, perching on the table. The old billy-goat was beginning to get impressed, even if he didn't have any notion of what I was talking about. I didn't have exactly much notion either, but I kept on. "The brain works by a kind of electricity, same kind as in the telegraph batteries at the depot. This gun—" I tapped the umbrella handle, and Jake started off again, but caught himself. "Has some sort of detector, a galvanic thermometer that senses electrical messages to the nerves." From here on in, it was pure dark and wild hazard. "Obviously," I said, "whenever one of those signals goes from this cerebral motor area here in the left hemisphere down to make the weapon hand move, it must be a special signal this gun was built to catch, just like a lock is made for one particular key. And near as I can figure, the gun has to be able to tell when that move coming up is going to be dangerous to the man holding it. Stands to reason, if it can tell when a brain's signaling a hand, it can tell too if that brain is killing mad. Some people can do that, and most dogs. So, if it senses murderous intent and a message to the weapon hand to move, it moves too, and faster. It homes on this disc like a magnet right into the hand of the gent that owns it, and aims itself plumb at the place the signal is coming from." I tapped the chart. "Right here." I poked the gunk out of a corncob, packed it, and lit up before going on. Jake stared at the umbrella handle like a stuffed owl. "Now, that 4th skeleton we saw sure as hell isn't human. He isn't from anywhere on this green earth, or I miss my guess. Might even have something to do with Crater Lake there, years ago. But we aren't likely to find out. But we do know that he fought 3 Injuns that probably jumped him all at once, and he killed every one of them with this gun before he fell. That brought Jake up short. The territory is kind of violent generally, and anybody or anything good along that line would be bound to have the sober respect of a ninny like Jake. I dug up an old glove and used spirit gum to stick in its palm the little disc from the skeleton's hand. I pulled the glove on my right hand and stood up with my hand about a foot over the umbrella handle. "Okay," I said. "Kill me." He was so orry-eyed by then, he damn near did it just to be obliging. But then the recollection of the night on the mountain and the 3 Injuns with their heads shot off sifted through, and he shied off. "Hell no," he hollered. "I seen that thing go before. I ain't about to get my head blowed to bits." And he went on. Well, it took me the best of 2 hours. I showed him the 2 studs on the underside that most likely were a safety device. I explained how probably the gun wouldn't go off unless somebody was holding it with a finger between those studs, which was why it didn't shoot when it went into the skeleton's hand that night. I finally got him by telling him, if I was right, we'd wire the 4th skeleton together, take it back east, and earn a mint of money on the vaudeville stage showing the fastest cadaver in the West. Mr. Bones, faster than Billy the Kid, and twice as dead. I said we'd bill it. Jake, he thought that was a lovely idea, and decided to go along. 14 times that eternal jackass raised his right arm at me, while I held my own gloved right hand over the weapon. But he didn't have any real heart for it, and 14 times the gun just lay there. Then I got a mite impatient, and kicked him in the kneecap. That 15th time he was truly trying. Skinny as he was, he'd have driven me clear through the floor, except that umbrella handle jumped into my glove and aimed dead at his forehead, snarling like a cougar. More correctly, the left side of his forehead. If I hadn't braced my index finger out stiff, that 15th time would have had him a dead man. Jake froze like a statue and hung in the air, staring at the gun, snarling away in my hand. Finally, I pulled the glove off with the gun still stuck to it and flung it on the desk. Then Jake gave me the 16th, and by the time I got up again he was gone, and the gun and the glove with him. Next morning the borax squabble blew up again. What with miners getting stomped, I didn't get to bed for a week, much less have a chance to find out where Jake and that damned weapon had lit out for. By the time I did, it was too late. Jacob Needlemeyer, the ribbon clerk, after 17 years, was on his way to glory as a legendary Dirty Jake. I got the start of the story from a drifter, name of Hubert Comus. He'd got into kind of a heated discussion in a saloon south a ways that ended with him and his other man going for the hardware. Hubert got his Merwin and Bray 42 caliber out, and being a fool, tried fanning it. Of course it jammed, and he laid the heel of his hand open clear to the bone. 'Twasn't the hand bothering Hubert, though. Like most, the other man missed him clean, but when the barkeep threw them both out, Hubert lit sitting on the boardwalk, and took a 6-inch splinter clear through his corduroys. While I was working on him, he told me about Jake. A man, it seems, had turned up in a little settlement called Blister, about 2 days down the line. Nobody noticed him come in, except that he was wearing one glove, a shiny clawhammer coat, and Congress gaiters. The general run in the mining camps doesn't wear Congress gaiters. He got noticed, though, when he showed up in a bar room wearing a pearl-grey derby with an ostrich plume in the band, and carrying a rolled-up umbrella under his arm. The little devil had stuck the shaft of a regular umbrella in the muzzle of the skeleton's weapon. It turned out he'd bought the derby that the storekeeper there had planned to be buried in. Where the ostrich plume came from, I never did find out. "He come right in the swinging door and stood there," Hubert said over his shoulder, "looking at the crowd. Purty quick they was all looking right back, I can tell you. That feather fetched 'em up sharp. Take it easy back there, will you, Doc? Then Homer Kavanagh, the one they called Hamhead, he bust out laughing. He laughed so hard he bent over double, and the rest of the boys was just beginning to laugh too when the little fella picked up a spittoon and dumped it down Hamhead's neck. The boys got mighty quiet then. Hey, easy, Doc, will ya? Hamhead straightened up, and his face went from red as flannels to white, just like that. He stood glaring at the little fella for a couple of ticks, opening and closing his fists, and then that big right hand went for the Smith & Wesson in his belt. Well, it was a double-action pistol, and it had a couple notches in the grip, but Hamhead never cleared it. I never even seen the little fella draw, but there was Hamhead falling with half his noggin shot away. Gently, will you, Doc, gently. The little fella stood leaning on his umbrella, looking down at him. What was that man's name? He says. Hamhead Kavanagh, somebody says back. Hamhead Kavanagh, the little fella says. He's the first. Then he shoves the umbrella back under his arm and goes out. We never saw him again. Some say it was a bootleg pistol he used, or a derringer in his sleeve, and some say he had a partner with a rifle in the street, but there wasn't nobody there. I was standing as close to him as I am to you, Doc, and I swear it was that umbrella. Ow! Hamhead Kavanagh was the first. I had kind of a personal interest in Jake and his weapon, so I kept track. There was Curly Sam Thompson, Big John Ballantyne, Redmeat Carson, Uriah Singletree, and 12 others known of, all dead within 18 months. Any man Jake could hoorah into a fight, with never a chance to get his right hand on iron before his head gave the signal and got blown off. He took them all on, and he never lost, because he couldn't. Jake was king of the hill now, all right. He had the success he yearned for. Yet, when he came back to see me last April, it wasn't to brag. He was in trouble. I looked up from a customer, a damn fool that sat on a Gila monster, and there he was, sneaking in the door, bareheaded, like a whipped hound, not the cock of the walk in the whole territory. He slid into the back room like a shadow, and the man I was working on never even knew he'd come. When I went in afterward, the lamp was out, the shade was down, and he was in a corner, nervous as a jackrabbit an eagle just dropped in a wolf den. "Buried my derby under a pile of rock up in the mountains," he whispered. "Look!" and he held out his glove. It was plumb worn out. The little metal disc was hanging on by a strand of spirit gum, and the fabric of the palm was in shreds. I looked at him for a minute without saying anything. He was still wearing the claw-hammer coat over BVD tops, but it looked like he'd been buried weeks in it and dug up clumsy. He had on greasy rawhide breeches and battered cowhand boots for shoes. He had a month's beard on his lip, and he stunk. This here was legendary Dirty Jake, no question about it. "Get a new glove," I said. "Nope," he answered. "No good. Last week in Ohorehizo I took the glove off to scratch, and right then a man braced me. He threw me in a horse trough when I wouldn't fight. I want you to fix me up good. I want you to open my hand up and set the dingus just under the skin and sew it up again. Knew a fella did that with $5 gold pieces 'cause he didn't like banks. Worked fine till he got a counterfeit, and it killed him. I'll lay low in the hills till the hand heals. No problems after that." No problems? Maybe so, but I'd been doing some thinking. Still, I kept my mouth shut and did what he wanted, and he slunk off with no thanks. Don't guess I really had any coming. After he left, I got out my tally book and ticked off the men Dirty Jake had killed. One-Eye Jack Sandstrom, Fat Charlie Tickner, Philander Quantrell, Lobo Stevens, Alec the Frenchman Du Bois, some jackass Texas nobody even knew, and the rest, all men whose brains had telegraphed a special signal to Jake's gun before it reached their own right hand. Well, there was a new pistolero in town. A month and a half later, I was craned around, trying to lance a boil of my own, when out of the corner of my eye I saw Dirty Jake go by under my window. He dug that hat with the ostrich plume out from under the rocks. His hand was healed. He was swinging his umbrella, and he didn't so much as look up. He was headed for the Owl Hoot Palace. I decided the boiled wait. Less than 5 minutes later, I heard the shots. 2 of them. A second later, Jubal Bean, swamper at the Owl Hoot, came pounding up the boardwalk and hollered in the door. "Doc, better come quick! Dirty Jake just took a couple slugs in the chest, and he never even got to draw." I took my time. "It was just a matter of odds," I said. "Who got him?" "The new one," Jubal said. "The man they call Lefty." Well, a couple more weeks to bleach, a little wiring, and I'll be heading east. Look for the billboards. "Mr. Bones, the fastest draw in the West. Faster than Billy the Kid and twice as dead. Presented by Hiram Pertwee, M.D. All I've got to do is figure how to keep getting mad at Jake. The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Chicken Farm by Rocklynne. Originally published in Planet Stories, March 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Just in from a long haul searching for asteroid juncture points, Harvey entered the lobby of the Hotel de Mars and went straight to the registration desk. The woman at the desk, who was blonde and blue-eyed, and inclining to chubbiness, looked at him, smiled. The smile was of such quality that Harvey's singed brown face set into a mould of utter attention. Finally, he let out his breath. "I want a room," said he, "on the Dimer's side." He attentively studied the cheerful face while she made out slips, accepted his signature, accepted his money. After he had the key, after he had his change, after everything was taken care of, he still stood there. The woman smiled into his seamed eyes. "Was there something else?" Harvey said, noting the emptiness of her chubby ring finger. "Ma'am, I'm an abrupt, outspoken man. I have no sense of humour. Some people like me, some people don't. I'll make my living moving around the solar system. I've never been rich, but I've never had any trouble making money as much as I want. Now what was your question again?" Her fingers slowly caressed a yellow pencil. Her smile was a little strained. She said cautiously, "I thought you wanted something else. What you want to do is talk, isn't it? You're in from a long space haul. It's lonely out there. Men get so they have to talk to a woman, don't they? So you'd like to take me out to dinner, and take me to a show, and take me up to your room to watch Dimus, which happens to shine only into the windows of your room." He looked at her. "I have no sense of humour," he repeated with great patience. "As you grow to know me, you will understand that. It will be no deterrent to our romance. However, I have other qualities." "Romance?" "Yes. What I want is you. I'm an abrupt man. My mind makes itself up quickly. In space, one must learn to make quick decisions. That's what I want. You. We'll discuss this at dinner. Please be ready." He went up to his room, refusing to let the bellhop touch his scarred suitcase. A little man, a man with great singleness of purpose. The blonde woman, who was nice and blue-eyed and inclining to chubbiness, looked after him blinking. She took care of the next guest. She thought deeply. She decided to go to dinner with the lost, lonely man from outer space. They ate in the main dining room of the Hotel de Mars, the D being rather a fancy touch. He did not talk. He ate. Great quantities of Martian food with strange exotic names. He ordered straight shots of whiskey afterward. Then he talked. Now, we were discussing something of importance at the registration desk, ma'am. What was it? Me. Fine. I'm glad you remember. She burst into laughter, then stifled the laugh in horror. He shook his brown, leathery head. Laugh, please. Laugh as much as you please. I have no sense of humour, but I think other people should have the opportunity of exercising theirs. I often say things which are funny to others. As for myself, I never laugh. This you will become accustomed to. I'll order you some champagne. Do you enjoy Terra Frenor 97? Love it, she said, having never had any. She leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. I'm enjoying myself so much. Everything is so unorthodox. I was brought up in Oregon on my father's chicken ranch. The town people were so orthodox. I came to Mars all alone just to get away from people orthodox. Now that I've become unorthodox myself, one of these days I'm going back to Oregon and teach them to be unorthodox. And of course, I'll own a chicken ranch. He gulped whiskey. He looked at her searchingly from steel-coloured eyes that had leather seams around them. You like chickens? Plymouth Rocks, she said. They're the most beautiful bird alive. I'll raise Plymouth Rocks. Fine, he said. I'm glad to know this. However, drop the idea of going back to Oregon. We'll be heading for the outer spaces, ma'am. Is this why I'm having dinner with you? Yes, to let you know my intentions. He called for the cheque. I'm 40 years old, ma'am. The time has come to make a permanent home for myself with a wife and children. For several days I've toyed with the idea of falling in love with someone. What's your astrological sign? Taurus. She looked at him over the champagne, her face wide with a smile that had an almost irrepressible giggle behind it. Fine, fine. He threw money on the table and got up. I'm Pisces. Pisces and Taurus get along very well. This is the reason I fell in love with you, ma'am. What was your name? I want to finish my champagne, she protested, not getting up. My name is Anna Christina Morley. He sat down. Forgive me, I'm an abrupt man. I do things, and then they're over. I never linger. As you grow to know me, this will become apparent. But finish your champagne. My kind of woman always speaks her mind. So your name is Anna Christina Morley. A very unusual name. A numerological breakdown would no doubt show you to be a strong, a firm, and idealistic woman. I am a fortunate man. Have you finished your champagne? I guess so, she sighed. She got up and took a cape that had a twinkling little bells on it, and that changed colour every 5 minutes on the second, and that told time. Where are we going? I'll take you back to your room, he said, and say good night. She was beautiful in the overhead sparkling lights of the dining room. Something caught her sharply on the solar plexus as he spoke. Why? She said forlornly. His singed eyebrows came up. Why? My purpose is accomplished. You know my intentions. Now I must go out and prepare. I'll be leaving for outer space within the hour. I'll be back in 10 months. He took her to the door of her room. Good night, Anna, he said. She stopped him. Her heart was beating too hard. There was in her a sharp emptiness, a terrific sense of frustration. "Kiss me," she said wearily. "You said you were in love with me, so we might as well get that much acquainted." "I am in love with you," he said. He immediately took her into his arms, kissing her long and hard. Then he released her, looking strangely into her eyes. "Anna," he said, "I shall be back in 10 months. I know you'll be here." He went down the stairs. She went into her room. She sat on the edge of the bed. Then she threw herself on the bed and cried, hard, angry sobs. Why had she allowed him to ruin what could have been such a splendid evening? She kicked her shoes off. They hit the wall with 2 walloping thumps. She lay on her back and laughed at the ceiling with tears coming out of her eyes. What an evening! An evening as strange, as abortive, as cruel as the man who had cut it off so suddenly. Her eyes snapped open then. She felt something happen inside her, a longing as wide as deep as black space. "Oh, no," she said in a tone that was low and explosive. She slowly turned on her side, sniffling. She couldn't help it. He was nothing, but he was incredible. 10 months! For years, the Asteroid Association had offered a flat rate of 1,000 credits to anybody who gave them the location of genuine asteroid juncture faults. They were engaged in a strictly scientific and commercially useless attempt to show that the asteroids once comprised a large planet between Mars and Jupiter. They needed evidences of lines of fracture showing where 2 separated asteroids once had been joined. The complete picture would finally give them a complete planet. Harvey had found 15 such points. The money gave him leeway to pursue other activities. 40 million miles above the plane of the ecliptic moved his small ship. He was not looking for juncture points now. He was looking for a particular kind of planet, one, moreover, which had never been discovered before. Therefore, he was hunting for a perp planet. He searched 2 months. That most celestial bodies within the solar system already had been discovered did not deter him. He found his planet and came to a landing. He got into his pressure suit, lugging his gravitic equipment with him. He immediately started taking readings. The gravity was shallow, less than 1/10 of a G. Far too little. There was no atmosphere. The ground was frozen, but upon submitting it to flame it gave off the lines characteristic of phosphorus, nitrogen, hydrogen. That pleased him. He made other readings. Then he went into his ship and wrote in his diary, "There are many drawbacks. The planet is only 483 miles in diameter. It, at present, has no atmosphere. Being frozen, it will have to be thawed. Obviously, it cannot, at present, support Plymouth Rock chickens, much less human beings. I must now determine velocity, orbit, year, and day." A month later, he wrote in his diary, "Money will be needed, much more than can be supplied by discovering juncture faults. Plymouth Rock chickens need worms. Worms, perhaps, need Plymouth Rock chickens. One finds it necessary to grow corn also. Gravity lugs must be installed deep in the ground. Gravity lugs are expensive. An interesting fact is that in 4 weeks this planet will intersect the plane of the ecliptic. Something can be done with this information." Harvey determined the major and minor apices of the perp planet. He determined its point of intersection with the plane of the ecliptic. Then he went to the planet Earth and came into a sleek landing at the New York spaceport. He went to the information window, asking for and receiving the time schedules of all lines sending freight or passenger ships between the planets. He studied them for a week in his hotel room. He went back to the information desk to confirm his findings. The clerk was most helpful. "Yes, The liner Hermes of the firm of Graminger and Lewis would leave Venus at 7:17 Solar Standard Time on a Wednesday 3 weeks from now, bound for Titan of Saturn. The space coordinates Harvey had figured out were correct. Yes, the shipping firm of Graminger and Lewis would not dare change their trajectory or the schedule on as little as 3 weeks' notice. To do so would involve loss of prestige as well as of millions of dollars in contracts and passenger fees. Harvey thanked him and went on to the claims registration office on Luna. "I wish," he told the official, "to register prior discovery and ownership of a planet whose orbit lies perpendicular to the plane of the ecliptic." The official doubted very much that any perp planets remained to be discovered, telling Harvey they were useless anyway. Harvey did not laugh. The official spent an hour poring over catalogues, showing increasing amazement. Finally, he said, "You're in luck." At the end of an hour, he had found Harvey's planet in numerous photographs, and had taken readings on the orbit which exactly coincided with Harvey's figures. He made out the necessary papers. Now Harvey owned a planet. Harvey said, "I'm an abrupt man, sir. I speak my mind. I have no sense of humour. As you must realize by now, I want a tank full of fuel on credit." The official shook his head. "I can't do it. I have no authority to give credit. This is the United States government you're talking to." He laughed. Harvey did not laugh. "I am asking for personal credit." "On what security?" Harvey thought. "On no security. I am an honest man. My word is good enough. However, there will be a bonus when the loan is returned. Before Thanksgiving, you will be in receipt of 12 succulent, tender, meaty Plymouth Rock chickens as large as turkeys. May I ask what your astrological sign is?" The official leaned back, staring, and making a soundless whistle. He couldn't laugh. This man had no sense of humour. He said, "Well, I was born August 26. "Fine, fine. A Virgo. You and I can do business, sir. Pisces and Virgo get along. I shall be leaving at 500 SST. I shall leave my vessel in your care. Good evening." He slept untroubled at the hotel connected with the claims office, and in the morning took off. The meter reading, which he did not even trouble to inspect, read full. He went to Venus, taking 2 weeks to get there. On the way he passed his planet, which he was naming Plymouth, but did not trouble to open the port to look at it. Not much could have occurred to misplace it. On Venus, he docked his ship at the central spaceport and went by tube to Venus Port. 5 minutes after getting there, he was talking to the secretary in the outer office of the firm of Graminger and Lewis. At first, the secretary did not want to admit him to see Mr. Graminger, but Harvey said, "May I have your name, please?" She gave it. He sat down with pencil and paper, and after 5 minutes looked up with a pleased smile. "Numerologically," he said, "we find a coincidence here. We are both 22s. This is an exceptionally strong number, denoting trust, idealism, and self-mastery. What is your astrological sign?" "Pisces." "Pisces. I, too, am a Pisces." She gave him a look. "Pisces people are not noted for their diplomacy or for subtlety. You're under the wrong sign." He frowned. "This I do not understand." She smiled. "Never mind. You can see Mr. Graminger in about 5 minutes." "Thank you. Perhaps we can share dinner this evening." "Well?" "I have no money, you understand." Her mouth fell open. She burst into laughter, and then clapped a hand over her mouth when she saw he was dead serious. She said quickly, "All right. I'll take you to dinner. I guess we poor fish have to stick together." "Thank you," he said. "We can go to the Milo Club. In return for the favour, I can promise you that before Thanksgiving you will receive 3 large Plymouth Rock chickens of unusual tenderness and flavour." He picked up a magazine and read while waiting. Graminger, when he saw Harvey, leaned back in his chair, scrubbing a meaty chin. He remarked he was pleased to meet Harvey, but he couldn't place the name, and did not understand how Harvey had got into the office without a prior appointment. Harvey said these details did not matter, but that what did matter was that he was here to make a financial settlement with a firm, rather than, later on, to bring suit against the firm for a sum of $1 million. Graminger's eyebrows went up. He smiled faintly, letting his glance rove over Harvey's stained leather space jacket and spotted denims. "I'm sure I'd like to hear your story," he said. "I may as well inform you, however, that any claims against the company must be laid before the legal department." Harvey stood at the desk, looking down. "I'm an abrupt man, sir," he said. "I do things quickly, and then they're over. I have no liking for red tape or legal manoeuvres. If my business is not settled before I leave this office within the next hour, you may expect to go to court and lose much more than the meagre damages settlement I am asking." "Damages? For what?" Graminger frowned irritably. His chair came down with a bang. "If you think you can pull a fast one with the firm of Graminger and Lewis—" Harvey broke in. He told Graminger about his planet Plymouth. He showed his papers of ownership. He described the orbit. He showed where the planet would intersect the plane of the ecliptic in 1 week, 7 hours, 28 minutes, and some seconds. He showed the official seal from the claims office proving that this was so. "Your liner Hermes," he said, "will intersect the orbit of the planet Plymouth some 17,000 miles from Plymouth. The atomic wash from the Hermes drivers will infect space for 100,000 miles around. This is standard knowledge and has been proved in court. Legal precedent has also established that nucleonic, gravitonic, or positronic infection of planetary farmlands constitutes a serious misdemeanor for which damages, both punitive and otherwise, may be sought." Graminger grinned. "Let me see those papers." He looked them over, chuckling. Once he looked up. "Planetary farmlands, huh? And this planet is a hunk of rock out in space. Frozen. Only 483 miles in diameter. No atmosphere." He scooped up the inter-office phone. "Phil," he said, "get up here. I wanted to prove something to a loco-joking yokel I've got up here in the office." He hung up. "That's my lawyer," he said, leaning back and folding his hands over his capacious stomach. "Too bad. Maybe you'll learn a lesson from this." "May I ask what your birthday is?" Harvey asked. Graminger told him. Harvey's jaw came out. "Cancer. Yes, I can see we'll have to fight this out." The lawyer came in. He smiled a little when Graminger explained. He looked at the papers. He shook a sleek head. He handed the papers to Harvey. "You don't stand a chance, man. Have you looked into the definition of what constitutes planetary farmlands?" "What is the definition?" said Harvey. "Planetary farmlands, legally and simply, are the natural surface or portions of the surface of a planet of any size which could support vegetative growths of any kind. Your mistake here is that this planetoid, and every other such a body that has been discovered, does not have a soil surface. Ergo, it cannot support plant life." "If it did have a soil surface," Harvey said. The lawyer looked at him whimsically. "It couldn't," he said, in what was meant as a kindly tone. "These odd-sized bodies that wander through space have invariably been discovered to be crystallized, meteoric, inorganic materials from top to bottom." "But if it did have soil, natural, original surface soil?" The lawyer spread his hands, shrugging. "It can't be. But if it were, naturally, the company would—" "Change the Hermes' trajectory," Harvey said. Graminger glared. "Graminger and Lewis has changed neither a schedule or a trajectory in its career as the oldest shipping concern in the solar system," he snapped. "Well," said Harvey, "what would you do if it were proved that Plymouth has a natural soil surface?" He took a flat paper bag out of his pocket and emptied a pile of dirt onto Gramminger's desk. The lawyer and Gramminger looked at the pile of dirt. Both men grew a little pale. The lawyer licked his lips. "If you show that dirt comes from Plymouth," he said, "Gramminger and Lewis will stand the expense of transforming the planetoid into a free mover." "This means," said Harvey, "that you would be forced to install gravitic machinery under Plymouth's surface, including plus and minus grids and controls that would make it possible to move the planetoid out of Hermes's way." "Yes?" "You would also install atmosphere-making machinery." "If the claimant asked for it, it would be a simple matter." "You would also provide a transmutator as an adjunct to the atmosphere machine so that water could be provided." Gramminger was being very silent and small behind the desk. Unconsciously, he nodded his head. The lawyer, his amiable manner somewhat shattered, nodded slowly. "These and other things could be done, and would be done in a hurry." "Also," persisted Harvey, "there would be an inconsequential cash settlement of perhaps 10,000 code credits." The lawyer was silent. He looked at Gramminger. Gramminger said slowly, "That is a small matter, and would be agreed to. But there is a large matter, and that is to prove that this soil comes from Plymouth. For my money, it's still a hunk of rock." Harvey stopped him. He explained briefly his experience in discovering asteroid juncture faults for the Asteroid Association. He explained that once, according to theory and great evidence, a large planet existed between Mars and Jupiter. The planet exploded, forming the asteroid belt, and throwing out large errant chunks of itself which moved in various peculiar orbits about the Sun. "Plymouth is such a chunk, and," added Harvey complacently, "I will undoubtedly be paid 1,000 credits from the Asteroid Association later on when I show that Plymouth comes from that shattered planet's surface. And I will prove also, for the first time, that the shattered planet contained a surface soil on which vegetable life was rampant. Plymouth is such a proof." Gramminger writhed and sweated. He pointed to the pile of dirt. "But you haven't proved." Harvey turned to the lawyer. "May I ask your astrological sign, sir?" The lawyer grimaced. "Why? I don't believe in astrology. I've been told it's Taurus." Harvey smiled. "This is a fine coincidence. My fiancée's sign is also Taurus. I am Pisces. The two signs are especially in affinity with one another. I believe you can trust me, sir." He looked straight into the lawyer's eyes. The lawyer grinned lopsidedly after a moment and turned to Gramminger. "We can trust him," he said. "He's right all the way down the line. Anyway, we couldn't waste time in finding out." "All right," Gramminger rapped the words out half angrily. "Take care of it, Phil. Get Parsons and Carey on the phone and ask them to send all their engineers and equipment out. Pronto." The lawyer nodded briefly at Harvey and left the room. "As for you," said Gramminger. He gulped and stopped. With trembling fingers he began shoving the pile of dirt back into the paper bag. Harvey thought a minute. "I wonder if I could use your phone," he asked. Gramminger growled an assent. Harvey sat on the edge of the desk. "Get me outside," he told the operator, who turned out to be a machine somewhere in the building. The mechanical voice told him to press the O key. He pressed the O key. "Get me Mars," he said. The mechanical voice changed to a human voice. "Get me the Hotel de Mars on Mars," he said. Gramminger was staring at him. A voice at the other end came through thinly. "Let me speak to Anna Christina Morley at the registration desk," he said. Gramminger sat down, beginning to smile and staring at Harvey as if not only a new planet but a new type of man had been discovered. Harvey said, "Anna, dearest, I shall speak very plainly, very quickly. I am a man of few words." "What?" His leathery face lost a little colour. "But you are my fiancée, you know."
"Am I?" she cried. "What makes you think so? What makes you think you can talk 15 minutes with a girl, have her fall in love with you, assume she'll go crazy waiting for you, waiting 10 months, when 4 months have already passed without hearing from you?"
"My dear Anna," he said, "if this is a joke—"
"You're a joke," she sobbed. She broke down. "I don't know what you did to me. Only 15 minutes. How could you have done that to me in 15 minutes?
He frowned. "I'm always certain of a situation before I leave it," he explained. "That is a common precaution that we men of space must take. An ordinary survival mechanism, I should say. Besides, you are a Taurus, I am a Pisces, and I computed that numerologically."
"Bother your astrology and your numerology," she snapped.
There was silence, a long half-minute of it stretching between Venus and Mars at a half-credit a second. Graminger continued to get more and more amused.
"What do you want?" she asked. "When will you come back, if ever?"
His singed eyebrow went up in puzzlement. "I told you 10 months, Anna. I meant 10 months. As for what I want, please, at once, send a space wire to your father in Oregon. Have him ship 5 hens and a cock by fast passenger express to the spaceport depot on Venus. Ask him also to include whatever special medicines, feeds, and instructions are necessary for the raising and nurturing of Plymouth Rocks." She gasped.
"For heaven's sake, why?"
"Don't you want a chicken farm? I am building one on a planet I own." The groan came over the phone, lasting long enough to cost Graminger and Lewis a credit and a half.
"Dad won't send them. I know. It's harebrained. No one's ever tried to raise chickens any place except on Earth."
"That isn't the point," he said. "Send the wire."
"All right,"
she said in a small voice. "Furthermore," he added, "inform your father this is a business venture. I shall keep him supplied, as middleman, with a new breed of Plymouth Rocks, which are considerably larger than turkeys, are more succulent, more tasty, and tender, lay larger eggs with possibly larger yolks."
"How?"
"I have some knowledge of biology and pressure chemistry, Anna. Plymouth will be ideal."
"What's Plymouth?"
"The name of the planet." Harvey cocked his ear at the silence. Then there were sounds of sniffles.
"I have to take care of a registration, Harvey," Anna said. "I have to go. I'm very proud that you love me, Harvey. I'll wait for you, and I'll convince Dad. Goodbye."
"Goodbye," said Harvey. He hung up. "She misses me," he told Graminger. "Poor girl. Would you like me to take the 10,000 credits in cash or as a cheque?" "A cheque," said Graminger. He wrote it out. Harvey took it and started toward the door. He called back, "Thanks for the use of your phone," and walked out. Graminger had nothing to say. Harvey went back to Plymouth some 2 weeks later. He now owned a much larger ship. It was crammed to the brim with chemical fertilizers to improve the soil. There were also seed grains such as oats, wheat, and corn. There was lumber for building, plumbing fixtures, windows, doors, everything needed to build several sheds, plus a long, low, rambling ranch-type house. The hens and the cock were aboard. There were 6 men also who would do the building and help in any other way necessary. Plymouth was a beautiful emerald planet as they hove in close to it. As they landed, a pleasant sunny atmosphere swirled around the ship. The gravitic machinery kept the gravity at Earth normal. The ground was already thawed, and was surprisingly like the rich, life-filled loam found in Iowa cow country. An engineer was waiting for Harvey, showed him the gravitic controls, explained the planet had been moved 1,000,000 miles out of its orbit so that the Hermes could plow past without harming it. By shutting off gravitic energy from one side, he explained, pressing buttons on the control panel, The planet could be made to move in any direction. Furthermore, the gravitation could be raised or lowered at will on all of the planetoid or of any small portion of it. "Fine, fine," said Harvey, much pleased. Before the engineer took off, Harvey promised him several large Plymouth rocks before Thanksgiving, and as an afterthought took a numerological reading on his name. Then he instantly started in to work. The house went up. Saws whined. Sheds went up. Hammers hammered. Lawns were laid. Ground fertilized. Worm eggs installed. Some natural vegetation of a weird nature appeared, its seeds having been alive but frozen for a time measured in epochs. No doubt of it, the soil was alive. The fowl flourished in the fenced-in yard, prone to no diseases, having no natural enemies, neither mice nor lice. Harvey worked with 3 generations of chickens. He made his experiments with fluctuating gravity under the chicken house. His employees were fascinated. Harvey explained. "I'm actually 50 years old," he said. "Don't tell my fiancée. She thinks I'm 40. But being out in space, virtually with no gravitational pull on my body for almost all of my life expectancy has been pushed up to somewhere in the hundreds. I can pass for 40. Gravity," he said, "makes people grow old and probably hastens death. The muscles have to fight gravity, so do all the other organs. The muscles toughen, get stringy. The skin, the nerves, the arteries, and the meat of the body get brittle and hard. This is what is known as old age. Think what effect a lowered or fluctuating gravity could have on these beautiful grey-white birds." Harvey experimented a great deal as the weeks passed. He often adjusted the gravity lugs down to a point where they exerted just enough force to hold the atmosphere to the planet. The results were remarkable on the Plymouths. The 3rd generation of fowl were distinctly a fifth larger than their ancestors. The cocks, which normally should weigh 10 pounds, now weighed between 10 and 14. The hens, in proportion, kept a couple of pounds under this. They matured faster. They bred much more vigorously than any Plymouth Rock ever had. The eggs were consistently larger. Harvey early decided against hatching incubators because the hens, untroubled by vermin or other influences such as bad weather, which could make them neurotic, paid tranquil attention to their jobs. He did, however, have open electric brooders constantly going so that the chicks could go to them for warmth if necessary. Lowering the gravity had a similar effect on his corn, oats, and wheat crops. They sprang up, maturing in a remarkably short time. There was plenty of feed for the fowl. Plymouth was rapidly becoming self-supporting. Harvey was pleased. He explained again. Pressure can be considered as a gravitational effect, and vice versa. Pressure chemistry causes certain chemical reactions to speed up, others to slow down. I figure that by Thanksgiving I can find the correct variation of gravitational pressure that will give me a breed of Plymouth Rocks never seen in this universe. By the time the 4th swift generation came along, he had almost reached his goal. Furthermore, the flesh was tenderer than any of these men had thought possible. When the time came for Harvey to take them back to Venus, he promised them they would be well supplied by the time Thanksgiving rolled around. Harvey was somewhat loath to leave the planet Plymouth alone. He had a certain fear in the back of his head that things would happen if he did. He intended to return as soon as he and Anna got married. He showed up at the Hotel de Mars a week ahead of time. At Anna's place behind the registration desk stood a white-haired little old lady. A chill started deep in his stomach when she told him Anna left 2 months ago. She produced a letter Anna had left him. It was brief and pointed. "Harvey," the letter read, "I know you lied to me. There isn't any planet called Plymouth. I looked it up in the star atlases. Nobody ever heard of it.
I'm not going to stay here and be bitterly disappointed when you don't show up at the end of 10 months. Goodbye."
Harvey threw the letter away. It had served its purpose. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm a man of action and few words. What is Miss Morley's Oregon address?" Nobody knew Anna's Oregon address. Harvey instantly left for Oregon. Landing there, he began looking. He had found juncture faults. He would find Anna. It took him over a month. He ran across her quite by accident behind the cigar counter in a drugstore. "Anna," he said, "there's no time to lose. Get your things. Quit this job. Come with me." He stopped anything she had to say. They were married in the next hour. An hour after that, they were on the way to the planet whose existence Anna still doubted. There was little room for doubt when that spot of entrancing green in an ocean of black was sighted.
"It's beautiful," Anna breathed, squeezing his hand. "But what's the rush to get here?"
He explained without rancor. "Your lack of faith in me cost us far too much time. This is a new breed of chicken. They propagate vigorously, but they have no natural enemies. Every living thing needs a natural enemy. Our Plymouths have probably overrun the planet." She gurgled, then put her hand over her mouth. He took her hand away. "Anna, dearest, laugh. Laugh as much as you please. But I have no sense of humour. This you will discover as we move through life together. I see nothing funny in this situation. Living creatures need natural enemies." When the ship landed, his meaning became obvious. Chickens flew in great squawking clouds through the air, walked and clucked in rivers at their feet. Feathers came down like heavy snow. The ground was covered with fluffy white mounds. From horizon to horizon there seemed to be little else but chicken. Anna was appalled. Harvey was planning. A slaughter would be necessary. "We're the natural enemies," he explained. "Your chicken farm is ready to pay off."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. Insert obligatory promotion for channel membership here.